The morning sun crawled across the bedroom wall, finding the edge of the bed. Zoe moved before the light reached her pillow. She kicked the blankets aside and hit the floor running. Every second mattered. She moved to the center of the room, her hands working with practiced speed. She pulled on her shirt, the fabric catching slightly against her skin, and reached for her running shoes. She tightened the laces until they bit into the top of her feet, securing her grip for the track ahead. She stood, checked the mirror, and caught her reflection, eyes locked forward. She did not waste a moment. She reached for her backpack, slung the strap over one shoulder, and turned toward the door. She moved through the hallway, her footsteps thudding against the floorboards. She reached the front door, gripped the handle, and pushed it open. The morning air hit her face, crisp and sharp. She stepped out onto the porch, took a breath, and started toward the school. The day had finally arrived, and she was already in motion. There was no time to lose. The gates of Rainbow Hills Elementary stood wide open, and the field inside was already humming with motion. Zoe broke into a final sprint, her boots hitting the pavement as she crossed the threshold into the track area. The air felt heavy with the scent of cut grass and the sharp sound of a whistle cutting through the chatter. Coach Ramirez stood at the center, gesturing to parents as they aligned rows of orange cones across the turf. Zoe slowed to a steady pace, her eyes scanning the crowd. She cut through the gathering groups, weaving past adults and equipment until she spotted the familiar faces near the starting line. Polly stood waiting, her gaze fixed on the track. Serena, Yolanda, Olivia, and Courtney joined them in a quick, tight circle. No words were needed. The group stood close, shoulders nearly touching, as they watched the coach move toward the starting block. The anticipation was palpable, a quiet tension that bound them together as the rest of the field blurred into the background. They were ready. The track was marked, the path was clear, and the event was moments away from beginning. Zoe reached out and closed her fingers around the smooth, cold surface of the relay baton. The weight of it was solid, grounding her as she stepped into the starting lane. Coach Ramirez held the flag high above the group, the fabric snapping in the breeze. Every muscle in Zoe's legs tightened, her weight shifting onto the balls of her feet. The air turned silent as the coach moved the flag down with a sharp, downward arc. Ready, set, go. The command cracked across the field. Zoe exploded forward. Her feet hammered the track, the rhythmic strike of her shoes against the ground syncing with her breathing. She pushed her pace, eyes locked on the horizon, feeling the wind rush past her ears. The distance between her and the next runner closed in seconds. She saw Polly waiting, arm extended, fingers reaching back. Zoe didn't slow. She drove her legs harder, thrusting the baton forward with a firm, decisive motion. The transfer was instantaneous. Polly caught the grip, and Zoe peeled away to the side, her lungs burning, watching as the next leg of the relay took flight. The race was fully underway. Each girl took her turn, legs pumped with frantic intensity against the track surface. Breath caught in their chests, turning into short, sharp gasps as they neared the final stretch. The finish line loomed ahead, a thin white mark painted against the dirt. They surged forward as a unit, their faces set in grim determination, pouring every remaining ounce of energy into the final yards. They crossed the line together, chest to chest, their momentum carrying them forward until they stumbled to a halt. They looked up at the clock and realized they had not won. The result hung in the air for a heartbeat, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. A collective grin broke out across their faces. They did not need a medal to justify the burn in their lungs or the strain in their calves. Zoe raised her hand, and Polly met it with a smack that echoed across the lane. They high-fived again, and again, until their palms stung from the force of the contact. They were breathless, exhausted, and entirely satisfied with the effort they had just spent on the track. The race was over, but the energy of the moment remained, buzzing between them as they began to walk off the field. The group moved toward the sand pit, a rectangular trench of loose, fine particles that glittered under the midday sun. Lola went first. She sprinted toward the wooden takeoff board, hit it with precise force, and launched herself into the air. Her body arched, arms windmilling for balance, before she descended to land with a heavy thud. Sand sprayed in a wide, textured arc, settling slowly over the edge of the pit. Nina followed, timing her steps with mechanical precision, her eyes fixed on the board. She took flight, feet tucked, and landed with a softer impact, leaving a deep impression in the center. Zoe watched the rhythm of their movements, noting the angle of their approach and the way they braced for the shock of the landing. Finally, it was her turn. She started at the edge of the runway, accelerating until the board neared. She struck it with her lead foot, pushed off with every ounce of power in her legs, and soared briefly before gravity reclaimed her. She hit the sand with a heavy puff, the fine grit rising to coat her legs. She sat up, feeling the warmth of the sand shifting beneath her palms, and let out a laugh that mirrored the collective mood of the afternoon. The midday heat drove the group toward the shade of a large, striped tent pitched at the edge of the field. They collapsed onto the grass, the ground cooling beneath them as the canvas blocked the sun. Zoe reached into her bag, pulling out a juice box and a crinkling package of granola. The sound of tearing foil and plastic wrappers filled the small space as they began to pass items around. They sat in a tight circle, legs tangled together, their breathing finally returning to a steady rhythm. Holly wiped crumbs from her chin, looking at the others with a sharp grin. "The hurdles were the hardest," she said, her voice rising above the low hum of the distant crowd. The group nodded in agreement, launching into a flurry of stories about near trips and fast finishes. They divided orange slices by hand, the citrus scent cutting through the dry heat of the afternoon. Each girl took a turn describing a moment of struggle, turning their mistakes into shared jokes. The tension of the morning faded, replaced by the quiet, steady hum of conversation. They leaned against each other, exhausted but satisfied, tethered together by the events of the last few hours. The laughter under the tent was interrupted by the rhythmic crunch of footsteps on dry grass. The girls looked up to see Coach Ramirez approaching, her clipboard tucked firmly under one arm. She slowed her pace as she reached the edge of the shade, casting a long, thin shadow over the group. She did not look at the scoreboard or the track, but instead scanned the faces of the girls, noting the shared crumbs and the way they sat pressed together. She stopped, resting her free hand on her hip, and nodded toward the center of their circle. The girls quieted, watching her expectantly. She tapped the edge of her clipboard with a pen, a dry, rhythmic sound that cut through the silence. "It is about the effort, not the medal," she noted, her voice steady and clear. She did not wait for a response, but the weight of her words settled over the group. The focus shifted visibly. The girls stopped comparing their results and began to look at one another with a different kind of awareness. The desire for a trophy faded, replaced by a recognition of the work they had put in side by side. The competitiveness of the morning smoothed away, leaving only the strength of their connection. The shade of the tent had been a sanctuary, but the call for the final event pulled them back into the heat. Zoe stood, brushing the grass from her knees, and led the way toward the center of the field. The air felt heavy now, charged with the weight of the day's conclusion. A thick braided rope lay stretched across the grass, its fibers coarse and frayed from countless hands. 11 girls lined up along its length, their shadows lengthening as the sun began its slow descent. Zoe reached down and wrapped her fingers around the rope. The material was rough against her skin, biting slightly into her palms. She looked down the line. Polly, Sorina, Yolanda, and the others were already set, their fingers locked tight around the fibers. They moved into position with a synchronized, wordless understanding, shifting their weight to find their balance. One by one, they dug their heels into the dirt, carving small grooves into the earth to secure their stance. The field went quiet. The distant shouting of parents and the whistles of other coaches seemed to fade into a dull, background hum. Everyone focused on the rope, their knuckles white, their bodies coiled and ready. The silence was absolute, a thin, taut wire waiting to be snapped. Zoe caught the gaze of the opposing side, took a breath, and screamed, "Pull!" Her voice shattered the silence, and the line erupted. Every girl surged backward, weight shifting in unison. The rope groaned, a harsh, scraping sound against the dry grass. It jerked violently, lurching first to the left, then snapping back to the right. Zoe felt the coarse fibers bite into her palms, a searing friction that she ignored. Her arms locked, shoulders burning as she fought to hold the line. Across from her, faces contorted into masks of sheer effort, teeth gritted, eyes locked on the shifting center of the rope. Their heels dug deeper into the earth, throwing up small clods of dirt with every desperate adjustment. The rope was a living thing, thrashing between the two groups. It stayed dead center for a heartbeat, then slid 3 inches toward the opposition. Zoe planted her back foot, leaned into the strain, and forced it back. Muscles trembled under the load, veins standing out on arms, every fiber of their bodies committed to the hold. The tension hit a fever pitch, the air thick with the sound of ragged breathing and the rhythmic thud of feet fighting for purchase. Neither side gave an inch, and the rope held, taut and vibrating with the force of 11 girls pushing against the absolute limit of their strength. Then, the impossible happened. One girl on the far side lost her footing, her heel sliding backward across a patch of loose soil. The balance vanished. The rope went limp in an instant. The sudden lack of resistance sent a shockwave through the line. Zoe and her teammates, braced for a force that was no longer there, stumbled backward. Momentum took over. Arms flailed, feet scrambled for balance that could not be found, and the entire group tipped like a row of dominoes. They hit the ground in a heap of limbs and spinning grass. The impact was soft, muffled by the turf, and the weight of the girl next to her knocked the breath out of Zoe. For a second, there was only the sound of heavy panting and the rustle of bodies shifting. Then, a stifled giggle broke through. Zoe looked up, saw the tangled mess of legs and tangled hair, and let out a sharp, breathless laugh. It spread like wildfire. They rolled onto their backs, chests heaving, palms stinging, and limbs aching, but the tension had evaporated. The field felt vast and open above them, and the hard, focused strain of the last minute dissolved into pure, exhausting relief. They lay there, staring up at the darkening sky, unable to stop shaking with laughter. The laughter eventually trailed off into the rhythmic sound of crickets beginning their evening chorus. Zoe pushed herself up, brushing dried grass and earth from her palms. The air had shifted, losing the sharp heat of the afternoon and settling into a cool, steady dusk. The field was bathed in long, amber shadows that stretched toward the fence line. Coach Ramirez moved through the group, her clipboard held tight against her side. She stopped in front of Zoe and held out a small, folded strip of fabric. It was a ribbon, weighted with the history of the day's races and the final, muddy tug-of-war. Zoe took it, feeling the texture of the material between her fingers. She lowered her head, steadying her breath, and carefully aligned the pin with the fabric. The metal clicked as it fastened. She smoothed the ribbon flat, ensuring it sat straight. A quiet stillness settled in her chest, replacing the frantic adrenaline of the morning. Around her, others were doing the same, their movements slow and deliberate. The frantic energy of the competition had burned away, leaving behind a grounded, steady sense of accomplishment. She looked down at the ribbon, then out across the field, feeling the weight of the day settle into a calm, simple satisfaction. Coach Ramirez backed away toward the equipment shed, holding her camera steady as the light turned deep gold. "Come on, together now," she called out. The group converged near the center of the track. Zoe moved into the center, feeling the warmth of her teammates pressing in from both sides. They draped arms over shoulders, leaning in close until they were a single, solid mass. Someone adjusted a pigtail, another smoothed a smudge of dirt from a cheek, and then they all looked toward the lens. The camera shutter clicked, catching the wide, genuine smiles of 11 girls who had spent the entire day pushing their limits. They held the pose for a heartbeat, savoring the stillness. Then, the formation broke into motion. They didn't just walk away. They turned toward the darkening horizon and let out a collective, high-pitched cheer. It started as a ripple and grew into a unified shout that vibrated in the cool air. The sound carried across the empty field, bouncing off the distant fence line and fading into the quiet of the evening. The school grounds were silent again, save for that final, fading echo of triumph. Zoe turned, took a deep breath, and began the long walk toward the gate, the day officially complete.